So before we jump into the nice clean sculpting, I'll just show how I approach doing the low poly that you see here. Like this is the final sculpt with the multi-res, but since I didn't record the whole retopologizing, I'll just show you quickly how I did it. So if I hide this, open this. Okay, so after I have this, which is where we ended up on the previous video, I would just create a plane, turn on my snapping, I set it to faces, and then it snaps, not exactly where I want it, so we just change it to individual elements. Then it's a little bit better. It's going to snap to the origin. And if we go in here, we can apply a shrink wrap. So shrink wrap, I just point to this model. So yeah, you see what it does? It makes the model like snap to the other model, right? But since we have this and that, it's going to work nicely, because otherwise you see our plane is still like this, but after the modifier it snaps. So we want to make it, oops, there we go. So now we'll have like a clean version. And since it's getting hidden, we can go into, what is it called? Object properties, and then just click in front. And if for a better view, you can change the color to be something else, and there you have it. And then in some cases, you'll run into an issue where, like you're seeing behind it, or that you're seeing the polygons behind it and it gets in the way. That's where backface culling comes in. So you'll have to just turn it on. So you see, you won't get this. It's going to hide the back faces. Oops. Yeah, so it's going to hide the back faces. So when you're modeling on both sides, it's not going to get in the way. At this point, you could also, okay, let's pivot to 3D cursor. So it's in the middle of the pig. And then also add a mirror modifier, and we need it on the y-axis. So yeah, so now I can just work on one side. And then obviously the tail will come in separate, but that's pretty much how I did it. So that's the setup, and then I would just, extrude and place it. And for like quicker, I sometimes would just go make a big face and then, add some cuts. Gotta make sure that I actually also place the faces and not just let the shrink wrap do its thing, because otherwise, yeah, it'll be messy. But yeah, it's pretty much like this. And the only things I followed is that the topology kind of follows the creases. So I'll have things wrapping around here. I have things going there. It's just following the details that I've already made. So then when I subdivide it, it doesn't create any weird kind of pinches or anything. Like the flow is exactly as it would go. If we unhide it, you'll see I'm following the creases here, obviously here. Other than that, it's not animated, so I don't mind too much. This is connected, it couldn't even move too much, but yeah, it could be cleaner, it could be nicer, but that's enough, I think, for what I need this to do. Let's move on to actual sculpting now. So the pig just changed color into green. That means we're on the right track. Anyway, yeah, we have a multi-res modifier applied and we have subdivided it once. So with a better poly flow now, I can be a bit more careful and a bit more precise, and clean up and further detail. Because in this stage, we're gonna push it further than we did on the Dyne Topo. You could have still done a lot more in Dyne Topo before this. As I said before, I'm just experimenting here. So I want to see like how far I need to push the dyne topo before I retopologize. But since in this case I had the concept, I had a pretty nice base sculpt, which I knew that's all I need before moving on. Like nothing's gonna change. I'm not gonna add any more limbs or change the shapes too much. So I was confident enough to do the low poly and then do the clean sculpt from there. The method here doesn't change too much. I'm just going to use pretty much the same tools I've used on dyne topo. It's just that it's like acting a little differently now that I have the poly flow to follow and like where the creases go. I can still push and pull things around a little bit, but for the most part, I'll want to keep with kind of the exact low poly model that I've made specifically for this, right? So there's no need to deviate too much. Like if I need to move a crease somewhere, I'll move the actual polys in the crease there instead of kind of sculpt over it to disturb the poly flow. Other than that, it's similar, same tools. And again, I'm just going to try and sculpt out as much as I can before moving up a subdivision level. Even though in this case, like you can always jump back down as well in subdivisions, so it's much more forgiving, I guess. Well, I'm not forgiving because dyne topo is very forgiving, but just in the detail level, it's easy to jump back and forth. If you need to move big parts of the mesh, you can jump down. If you need to work on the details, you go back up, right? But at this point, I'm just like, what level is 2 on subdivisions? So it's not high poly yet at all, but since the poly flow is following where my shapes are, like I can get a bit more out of it than when I had like a higher like dyne topo mesh. I'm not sure if this process isn't gonna get like a bit too long to watch because I think it's like around another hour of me sculpting this. So obviously feel free to speed up the video. I don't know. Yeah, I just leaving that up to you. I'm not speeding up anything. This is the real time as I worked. I'll be going through every detail established in the dyne topo sculpt and make it a bit more precise, maybe push things around a bit to adjust as there's like most of the design is already there in 3D as well from the initial sculpt, but there might still be changes that I figure out a bit later on to change and tweak just a little bit for a nicer look. I think one of them will be like the eyebrows that you see now. It's like it has this kind of dent in the middle, right? Like I got rid of that later on because, well, the face, I wanted it to look a bit human-like. That made it look a bit too human-like. So there's still room to, change things a little bit if you want to. But other than that, I find like this stage pretty like mindless almost, and because so much is already done, like the thinking part, at least the designing. Now it's just kind of going through the steps to add the extra detail and clean up. So yes, this is enjoyable as much as the previous one as well, I'd say. But I find this part to be easier to approach because I already know where things are and what's what. So it's more of a technical thing to just go through, put in the time to finish it off. But if you still struggle in some area of the model, one advice I can give you is to just leave it for that moment. Just move on to some other. Like if I was really struggling getting the face right, I would just move on to the back side or something else, kind of come back to it later with fresh eyes, and maybe then it'll just click as to why it's not working, or have someone else look at it, and because they'll also have a fresh look, fresh take on it. When you're staring at it for hours, you're gonna miss even the most obvious things. It's good to take some breaks in between as well. For example, also before posting anything on, say, ArtStation, I leave the final piece to sit there for a day or two, and then look at it and see if I notice anything that I could still improve, which usually might be the case, but then I'll question myself if it's like worth it. Like, am I learning anything from it? Because again, art pieces can just, they can just be endless. Like it can be done also when you call it done, because there's always something to work on it. It's more like coming back to, like, why are you doing this? What is it for? I think that should, or at least in my case, that does dictate when am I done with a piece. Oh, and before I forget, I should mention that this low poly mesh was shrink wrapped, like subdivided and with multi-res, and then shrink wrapped to the Dynatopo sculpt, right? So that's how I'm getting the details from the sculpt onto the low poly mesh. There are certain areas in this low poly that I could have added like a few more loops. Like, yeah, this neck part, if you can call it neck. I don't know. But yeah, if it had like more loops, it would have been just, well, more geometry to play with once adding all the folds. Because at this point I need to like subdivide it much to a higher level just to be able to do the details, which is like, it's okay. But you can see like maybe my face, like the eye region, is becoming very detailed, while the backside is still fairly low poly. So you'll get that inconsistency, yeah, especially if you would, say, do any micro details later on and you wanted to apply across the whole mesh. You're not gonna get that same exact look of the noise if you have inconsistencies like that. I'm not worried about it. This is a stylized sculpt, so I'm not gonna be doing any tiniest, smallest noise details, because I'm not a fan of doing those. I don't care about that. So it's just like a chunky sculpt, sort of. So I'm not too bothered, because the backside is going to be smooth, and then I have all the details where I need them. And the whole differences in the, well, I mean, they're fairly small, but like those differences in the poly are not gonna become an issue. But even then, like you usually want more details in the face, right? And less in some other areas. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm still like using the simplest tools here. It's not gonna get much more complicated than that, because for something like this, to me at least, is very much about just having nice shapes and forms, and I don't need any like fancy brushes to achieve those. So I'm just moving and tweaking things a lot all around from all the different angles to get a nice shape that I want. And other than that, I don't need any magic tools or like anything extra. It's just that, just like previously, I will try to get as much as I can from the low poly. But as I said, like with the multi-res, you can still jump between them. Like I didn't need to do it too much, but it's always an option for bigger like shape tweaks. It's just that in this case, I really went through like and added as much as I could in the like lower poly before moving up. There will be some areas that seem like you can't get things right because of how low poly it is at this stage. But I'm keeping in mind that I'm gonna go back to a higher, no, not back. I'll go to a higher subdivision level and adjust things there. Like the ear part is like one of those. I can't get like can't get the edge sharp enough as I want it on the bottom there. So, but I'm keeping in mind that I will fix it once I'm in a higher subdivision, or this part I'm working on now. I want it like to have like a flat, thick edge, which I can't do too much now because there's it's still very low poly, but I'll be able to later on. I like that Blender has the color for the different brushes. Sometimes I accidentally press the wrong button, but then I know I have the wrong brush because of the color. So usually when you see it's blue, I will either have the standard brush or the draw brush. And when it turns yellow, it's going to be move, like the grab brush or pinch. In case, you miss out on the shortcuts that I press. Because like grab is G and pinch is P. And I think as soon as I press that, I press something else, so the screen keys just disappear, right? So, but again, if you have the brushes menu on the side in sculpting mode, you can just hover over them and see all the shortcuts in there. Watching this back myself like makes me think if there's anything I could do like a bit differently, maybe some tools that would be better for the task, or maybe I could go for a quicker, messier dyne topo into a low poly. Like I'm very interested in the process of things, so it's likely that I'll tweak something in the process when I do my next sculpt, just to play around with things, or different assets will require a little bit of a different approach. It's just always a curious thing to me if something can be done like a bit differently, and how would someone else approach it? Because it's the fun learning part for me with the tools, and there's always something new, right, to try out, and maybe there's no need to slave away at a certain something if there's a better approach, or even a better brush. Like I am using the simple default brushes, but maybe there's something out there that would make certain things much simpler. Like I think I'm sure there could be a nice brush for like fat folds, right? Something that kind of carves in and pinches and maybe inflates almost at the same time. Like I don't mind working like this, of course, and just slowly building up that detail, like then carve in, then I will pinch, and then I will go in. But you have to work, smarter, not harder. I don't think like putting the restrictions on yourselves on yourself in the way you work makes you a better artist in any way. We like Michelangelo didn't sculpt his sculptures with a fork, even though I don't know, maybe he could have. But what would be the point? Like I've seen people do insanely amazing paintings with a mouse, but then why? Just makes no sense to me. Like also, if you wanna do best art, you kind of need the best tools, right? Everybody's like tools don't matter. Like, and in a way they don't, because if you're good at it, it doesn't matter if you have like lesser tools. If you know what you're doing, you're gonna get there. But and a poor artist is not gonna become better with good tools. But it would be a lie saying that a tool doesn't help you get like a better result or a faster result. Like, for example, Blender's sculpting tools used to be quite a bit worse before, right? And I didn't even sculpt in Blender at the time because I just didn't find it enjoyable. Like the brushes felt horrible. And then a while ago now, like they got updated and everything feels nice. Like they're behaving like I want them to behave. So I feel more in control of what I'm doing in here. And that's why, I can sculpt in Blender. I don't necessarily need ZBrush, as I mentioned, for the stuff that I do. So tools matter to a degree. And there's such a wide array of approaches to choose from these days. Like I myself, I don't get confused so much, but like have a hard time deciding how I wanna approach something in my personal work. Whether I should like texture a prop in Substance Painter, or if I should create some procedural textures in Substance Designer, or even do some procedural shading in Blender itself. And I end up playing, like I have folders upon folders of stuff that I've kind of messed around with and never got anywhere. But you always learn. I think it's good, at least for me, to know, like to be aware of the different techniques and working on different projects. I can then make a sort of a judgment call as to what would be the best approach. But I also, it's kind of my downside as well, is because I tend to jump around a bit too much. If like I'm trying to be more focused with this pig now. Like I'm gonna do a sculpt. I'm gonna continue on with the texturing, but it's sometimes I get lost. Like if I decide, I'm gonna learn some like sculpting texturing, and then after the sculpting I'll move on to texturing, and I'll spend like a month or so just playing around in Substance Designer, trying out different things, and forget that I have something else to like this to texture. But that's just kind of my curiosity getting the better of me. There's so many things to experiment with. I'm happy every time I finish a piece, which has been going rather well this year. I think I've been fairly focused on something specific. But yeah, like even you see like all the concepts as in my reference images, right? Like I painted all these like, I don't know, I think like half a year ago, maybe. I literally, I don't even remember, because, I was like, oh, I want to do like a set of models to hand paint texture. And I start with concepts, obviously, right? Instead of finding something and jumping straight on texturing, I started very beginning at the 0 point, and then I have this sitting there for half a year before I come back to it and be like, oh yeah, okay, I that's what I wanted to do. I get very sidetracked, as in, like, I wanted to practice texturing, and for some reason doing these videos now about sculpting, like, I don't know, it's but it's personal work. It doesn't bother me too much. It's just when I guess I'm doing what I'm enjoying at the moment. It seems to me that as long as I learn something on whatever I'm working on, I'm gonna be happy. I'm glad enough that these days I can stick to more or less like a specific style. Like I want to do stylized, so I'm kind of staying away from realistic stuff. So I'm happy that that seems to have stuck with me, and that's what I want to do still after a long time. But other than that, yeah, I will jump around. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. Okay, so what just happened in the background there is I went up a subdivision level, and I have all the extra kind of nasty details coming from our Dyn Topo sculpt. Because obviously, like, it's picking up the sculpt from before, and the sculpt was like fairly messy. So now I'll be going through the whole mesh again just to kind of fix those issues. Maybe it would have been a good idea to like go to a higher subdivision level, kind of smooth things out, and then go back out. So then whatever we sculpt doesn't get destroyed as much in the with the extra details that we add. Like the shape is still there, but if like the smaller detail kind of get a bit, you see, like a bit dirty all around. So I'll go out, just smooth things out now. A lot of holding shift for the smooth brush. And then since I've just added this extra level of detail, I can go over the whole mesh again and see how far I can push on this, and then subdivide again, and then push on more, and so on, as much as you want, or as little as you want. I'm starting to notice certain things, like these folds are not wrapping around as nicely as it could. It only shows up from a certain angle, so gotta be careful. This is a tricky area just because I left it connected to the body so much. Would have been a bit easier if I separated that leg from the body. But yeah, again, I'm just going to like sculpt it in and then inflate it over, so it just still looks like these fat folds are kind of rubbing at each other. It's still the same process, even at this level. So each time I'm just able to work in more detail, be more precise about the shapes, and go from more broad, big shapes into smaller shapes. So obviously, I'm also working, fast in the beginning, and now I'm slowing down, being a bit more careful. And that continues on when I add even more, then I'm working even slower and being even more careful, just to keep things nice and consistent. It's a bit of a different approach in that sense, but again, same tools, nothing too crazy. I can just get a bit more out of it. But you can see this area, for example, on the back, like I can barely get the folds going because I have so few polygons, while there are pinches on around like the legs. It's much closer to, well, not the final, but I can get much further with it. So I know that I would need at least one extra subdivision for the back area to get enough details for the high poly sculpt, while it is going to be coming like almost too detailed, in some other areas. It's not too detailed, like it's still fine and controllable, but that's the whole difference that I was talking about in the beginning of how you retopologize your mesh and then move on to subdividing it, and when you can get a bit more detail that you can pull out in certain areas and a lot less in others. So something to keep in mind if you can foresee that from happening, you can make a bit of a cleaner mesh than I did. Again, it's not going to become an issue in this specific case, but it could in some others. So keep that in mind. In here, since I'm not gonna be adding like any like miniature, like poor details, and the only folds on the back I know are gonna be the ones sort of sculpting right now. Otherwise, the top part is going to be smooth. So I'm not worried about it not having enough polygons, or the fact that I would need to subdivide the model more than I need for most of it. Kind of goes into the approach and what you need it for, or even like kind of pre-production concept phase where you can figure out and foresee that stuff. Like if I was still deciding what I want to do, maybe I want something on the top. Maybe there's some detail, some more folds that I would need. But at this stage, and since it's Blender, I could just even go back into my low poly, lowest subdivision edit mode, and then just add, like fix it up, and then go back in here. There might be some fixing once, with the extra loops, and then the shapes of how it gets subdivided. But like you're not stuck here. But it's good to have like pre-planned before. It's good to have like a finished, like nice concept. At least for myself, I know people like do concept sculpts for it, which you could just do the Dyn topo thing. But then like at some point you want to be, if you're going like for the final resolution, like final model, you probably want to have a certain idea, right, where it goes and how it looks. So at least I don't know. I don't want to be kind of guessing and figuring out what the concept is, like what the model is, all throughout the process. Like at certain point, I want to be like, okay, this is it. That's how it is. That's what I want to take it and how it looks, and then I just want to do it. Which is this whole video where I've figured all the things before, and now it's just making it look nice. And you see there's a lot of tweaking and fixing and leaving it and coming back to it. It can go on, but I want things to look nice. So I will, like, I think spending the time on such detail, making sure it's clean and it looks good is worth it in the end. Like you do more and more of this stuff, you get to know later on how you're gonna approach like this same sort of situation, right? If I have this sort of pinch of like a leg, hand, being close to the body, is like, how do I want to approach it? Like, yeah, as I said before, maybe I don't want it to be connected to the body. Maybe it would have been easier if I had this, leg as like a separate from the body. So it would be a bit nicer to go in and kind of make it look like it's pressing on it. But that's something, for next time that I can try out. And now I am having a few issues, I think, with the whole polyflow in there, but I'm also I don't have enough polygons so much there to do exactly what I want to do, but we'll get there. As long as I notice these sort of things and I, kind of keep them in the back of my mind for next time, or even for another area of the same mesh, it's a nice little tip that I've kind of, I guess, learned myself then while working on it. And those are the sort of things that I always look at. I always think of, like, if there's another better approach or what I could improve in the future, because it's not necessarily the best idea now to go back in and separate it. I'm like kind of fighting through it, but for next time. I don't know if I can call these folds like the selling point of the model of the Sculpt, but it's one of the very few like details that I have on it. So I do want to spend some extra time and make sure they kind of make sense. Because I mean, I don't know. I'm using it's stylized. It's a stylized model. Excuse, so it can be whatever. But as long as like at kind of first glance it looks like it makes sense, that's good enough for me. But most of the time it would be a good idea to go and search for reference to figure those sort of things out, because I'm sure you can find, good examples of how skin would fold. But then I don't know if I want it to be realistic. But even if you find, you can find reference not for copying, but for a good example. So you can interpret it and push it in the direction that you wanna. So you're not guessing so much. Like I thought for this, so something like this, I kind of had it in my head how I want it to look. I'm like fairly okay with the result. I think like it looks like fat folds. Would they be folding like that? Like I'm not too sure, but I'm also not too sure if I care that much about it. Like it's already a ridiculous looking sculpt, but who knows? Like maybe that extra level of not realism, but like a real world reference would have improved it. But I will never know. Like I'm definitely not paying any attention to anything anatomical when sculpting this. I'm sure that's fairly obvious. I find the hard part in like, sculpting stylized meshes is that level of detail like across it, because you're obviously not adding the tiniest detail, but like having it be like kind of high poly and have the details in the right places and other areas like being very smooth is it's a little bit like I find tricky for me because you're always like feel like you have all these polygons to work with and you could be adding something more, but it's more about just having it at the right places, having everything clean is the tricky part. And just to let you know, like I don't have any like references to my site. Like all the references I have for this are the ones that are there in Blender, and the only time I might look at them is when you see them on the screen there as well. That's I find a strong part of being able to do like both. You know, being the one that made the concept and the one that's making it in 3D. Because in it's like I don't know, like it's I feel confident enough like approaching it with minimal like minimal viewing of the reference because you know I've kind of made it. I know where like things are and how they go. Like I don't need detailed views from like you know side, front, and all that. I will usually I will just make like a 3/4 view, which obviously gives you the most amount of information for 3D, and I can just go on from there. It's a similar thing that like I do at work as well. And then even if at work, if it's not me who made the concepts, I've been working, you know, in that style, and with a concept artist for a while now, so we can keep the concept art like fairly simple. I don't want to say loose because it's usually very nice drawings, but we don't go into like super crazy detail. And then, you know, with just a little bit of back and forth, we can come up with a final model. So in the end, you know, it saves time because we don't need to like slave away on super precise drawings and super precise renders. I can't remember where I've heard this advice now because it's been ages ago, but it's just been stuck in my head. And it's like about art being like how little you have to do to reach the result, right? So say when it comes to 3D and some environments, if you know that something is going to be far away, then do you need to make it in 3D or can it just be part of the texture and it's going to be perceived as 3D? Like it's that sort of things and like obviously many more, but like it's like, is there a need to overdo something if it's never going to be visible? Which I'm also like, while I'm giving this advice now, you know, to you, like I don't know if I keep to it myself too much. Just because I don't know, I enjoy having things clean, and that's why I think I also like video games more than like animated movies or like feature films. It's just because in film usually you build for for the shot, and in games, since you know the player is going to be seeing things around likely from a lot more angles, you make like the full thing. Because I find myself like, even if I'm making something that's going to end up being a 2D image, I find myself hard to just leave certain areas, unfinished, even though I know they're not going to be seen. It's such a like silly thing, really. But I constantly need to fight myself to keep away from just, I don't know, perfecting, the mesh when I don't even need to do that. Okay, so a higher subdivision level, and we're back on the face. I fixed the eyebrow thing, as I've mentioned in the beginning, and I'm going to be fixing up the eye now. I think I've made it like bulge out too much. It was looking kind of off. But yeah, with every subdivision level, there's a bit more details that I can add. There's a few more fixes that I can do where I can be more precise and clean up the areas as well. So it's getting closer to how I imagine it in my head to be. And just kind of define how all these shapes meet, and it's leaving less for the imagination. It's putting it out there now. This sort of like building up gradually is, what saves, I think, me from just a lot of trouble, which is, I mean, the usual approach, right? For an organic sculpt, you're not going to subdivide the mesh 5 times and go straight into details. Though I don't know, maybe somebody does, but usually not advisable, because you're always building up on top of the shape that you have. And if the underlying shape is not right, then no matter how much detail you add to the mesh, it's not going to help it. It's like a beginner mistake to be made, and it's very obvious in the models where the shape looks like, a smoothed base mesh, and then there's all the details on top of it, which, they're not adding anything really, because like the underlying structure is just not there. So kind of have to be careful. Just like if you were painting in watercolors, you don't go and start painting with black. You build up the values gradually. You start with light and you build up, because there's no way of going back, right, with watercolor. If any of you do watercolor, I've dabbled with it. Again, it's interesting to know the different approach that you need to use for different mediums and I guess different subjects. Like at some point you could just not at some point, like sometimes you could just sit down and think about it and write down how you want to approach it, and that might be a lot more helpful than just kind of randomly trying at things. I think as artists, we forget that part sometimes, and like writing things down can be very, very helpful. For me, it's helpful not to get sidetracked. Like if I'm working on a bigger project myself, I might even make a list of the props I want to make. I will have some thought of like how much of what I need, like just separating that part from the whole process is helpful. Just like it is, if you're doing like a 2D illustration, to separate different like process steps as well. To like, first you're going to make first you have an idea, obviously, so you can separate that whole part of like coming up with the idea, or you can jump straight into sketching. which is going to be your idea generation part. But after sketching, you might want to do some like construction drawings or some perspective or reference gathering, and then move on to like more, say, final sketch, and then like tighter line art or just put the shapes down. It's like however we want to approach it, I find it useful to separate a single step. So at one time, you're not thinking about, composition, storytelling, design, line art, and shape and form, and 3D and lighting. Like, because at that point, more than likely you're going to miss out on something. But having it as a different step and the only thing to focus for you, it's going to make it much easier. So you can see me jumping around a little bit. So while I'm working on the face, like I'll just notice things here and there of like, oh yeah, I wanted to do that. So I'll be kind of moving from one area to another while still kind of focusing on the face at the moment. Because again, I couldn't get the eyes shape right exactly, so kind of left it for now. I was like, I can't just be fiddling at it for half an hour. So, and since I had an idea of what I wanted to do with the mouth, I just went back to it, get that done, and then I can come back to the eye to fix that part. I always keep smoothing stuff out. It might not show super clearly when I'm smoothing, when I'm holding shift. I think it shows as like shift and mouse click, shift click or something on the screen keys. Or just like shift. But anyway, yeah. So I'm smoothing stuff out because then I don't want any like lumps and bumps to carry over into the higher resolution. Oh, and the red brush is kind of like the scrape brush, like a flatten sort of brush. It just, quite literally just flattens the shape. And then I'm going to use in a moment masking, which was like the first time I used it for this mesh, but it is a very powerful tool that I haven't really utilized much at all in this sculpt. But hopefully you can see like how I'm using it here, and you can like you'll understand that there's obviously a lot more ways it can be used. Yeah, so it's like since I don't use it that much, I literally need to go and find it in the brushes, just because I haven't memorized the shortcut. But yeah, so the thing I'm gonna do here is I'm going to mask out the top part, the top lip, just so it doesn't get affected, just so I can kind of rearrange a little where the top and bottom lip sits. So I want to get more of a curve on the bottom lip, but there's no way of doing it if with a grab brush, and if I don't mask the top part. So after I masked it, I can play with the bottom lip, and then I'll be able to also invert the mask, which then will allow me to obviously work on the upper lip. This is quite a nice, clean way to do this. Yeah, I think you'll see this being used all over for many different things. not just like pig lips. For some of the shortcuts, you see you have like a menu on the top left of the viewport, which says mask. If you open that up, you can see like all the shortcuts of like I think Control I is for inverting the mask, like Alt M is to unmask everything. But yeah, all the shortcuts are there also if you want to check those out. I mean, everything is in some menu somewhere. It's just once you get used to doing the shortcuts, you can actually forget that there is a menu. I sure as hell, like I don't even know where some of the things are because I've put it in my quick access bar, or I just know the shortcut. And if somebody asked me to point out where something is, I might not know. Or in Blender you can press F3 and then search for anything. And in certain cases where there is a tool that I use so rarely that it's no point to put on the quick access bar, and almost no point to memorize, or at least slow to reach it if you know where it is, and even in the menus. So I just use F3 to do a search on a tool. Okay, yeah, so I went to that menu just to show you the press that shortcut to get rid of stuff. I've had some, in some cases, I'm not sure if I'm doing something off or something, but when after using the mask and then clearing it like that, and then trying to mask something again, the mask wouldn't show up. Again, I'm not sure if it's me messing something up or if there's some bug. But in some cases, even if you don't see the mask, you might want to click Alt M if something's not sculpting right. If it feels like you have a mask, it's just, I don't know, something iffy somewhere. Yeah, but I'm glad to say Blender hasn't made me work around the bugs really, because it's pretty darn smooth experience. Unlike the one I've had in Maya, where you kind of know the bugs that are there, but you also know a way to work around them, and you just kind of take it as part of the process. Blender doesn't seem to behave that way, which is nice to see, and probably why so many people are using it these days. You can probably tell this eye area is giving me some trouble. So yeah, sometimes it's just move on somewhere else, forget about it for a moment, and sometimes it's sticking with it because I know what I want from it. I just need to kind of gradually fix it. And I got just a little bit sick of looking at the green, because the green was all the way back from when I was retopologizing, and I don't need that anymore. So I'm going to go back to gray and then just try out different matte caps just to see how the shapes are reading, if I have anything like looking really, really off. Obviously, there's areas to smooth out here. That's clear, but yeah, I'm not gonna like continue working with the crazy green matte cap, but it's nice to just check out if anything is wrong. There's a bunch to choose from there. Some more ZBrush-like if you're used to that, but I don't like the red one, so I'm just going to jump back in a moment to the gray one. This one does have like a nice specular to really show the details, but it's too strong of a color for me to kind of keep looking at. I don't know, it's a little bit annoying. I hope that this process that shows, like, a normal way of working among all the time lapses, just how little by little things are getting built up. It's a bit more of a clear understanding of a real workflow. You can get really led astray by the twice speed time lapses. At least I know I have. Just trying to after seeing many of those, just trying to move your brush as fast as you saw in the video, forgetting that it's like sped up 4 times or something. Then it becomes too much of just a muscle movement without any thought behind it. And I'd rather you see how it is in reality, and then just how it, I'm not gonna say that it's exactly like every brushstroke takes a bit of thought, but I'm not in a hurry. I'm not rushing anywhere. It's just like a normal way of working. And I know, no, I'm still on the face. I was just pointing out there the curve I want to get. Like a good 3D artist is going to manage, to notice those sort of details in the concept. And I'm not saying I'm doing, a perfect job here, because my 3D mesh is like still pretty far away from the concept, I'd say. But the thing is that, in this case, I don't necessarily need to make it exactly like that. No one's going to come and tell me like, "Oh, this is off, it's wrong." But in some cases, that might be the case. But since I was pointing out the curves of the eye, now I'm trying to go back a subdivision level and make sure I get that nicer curve. So it's not just completely round. It kind of has like a longer edge and then like a longer curve. And then, after the corner, it's like a shorter curve, which is easy to miss. Like if you just kind of do it, oh, it's a knife, boom, boink, and it's kind of done. But no, like those sort of little details, like they're not there randomly. They're there like for a reason. And hopefully, it makes the mesh, the shapes of the mesh look more appealing because there's some sort of design behind them, and it's not just kind of default random eye. You see how small my movements are now when I'm moving things around. So even if I'm going to make a bigger change, I don't want to just take the grab brush and move it straight into place. I'm going to more nudge it like little by little, just to keep things like very kind of clean and even, to be more in control of what I'm doing. I think those like smaller increments, like gradual nudges, is going to produce a result closer to what I'm looking for. Like there was a time when I could have just grabbed it and pushed it straight away, which was like in the Dyn topo phase, right? Which is, we're past that now. So now we're being more careful, more precise, more slow. And I'm finally getting somewhere with AI. I know I've spent a lot of this video just trying to make that look right, but it is where people's eyes are. It is where people's eyes are going to look. Usually, people's eyes are gravitating towards, like naturally, towards faces, and this is sort of becoming or it is like a fairly human-like face, and it is the most detailed area as well. So I know if people are going to be looking at the whole mesh, that's going to be the focal point. So it's extra important to make it look correct. You can see how sharp the creases look when I zoom out further away. So it might need in the end a bit more smoothing out, because in the whole composition, well, whatever it might end up being, or if it's going to end up being, but at least the idea is that this is a fairly small element, right? So if you are going to see it like far away, you might need to exaggerate the forms quite a bit so it still looks nice and not made out of like these sharp creases. Finally, for these areas, I have enough polygons to make the right creases that I wanted before, but I couldn't. So I'll be able to move things around here as well, get them a bit closer to what I had in mind. Though I won't be adding any like more detail, just more kind of just kind of tweaking and adjusting what I already have more. There's many areas of the bottom part to kind of smooth out and tweak, but I'm trying to keep in mind that we're not going to ever see the bottom part, and not worry about those too much, because I also kind of ended some edges and triangles over there, so they're not going to smooth very nicely. But it doesn't matter if we don't see it really. Then just add some of the folds as well, now that I have the polygons to do that. This is an important area of how the head is meeting up with the body, so I just want to have some fat folds also appearing. It is like a detail that's coming at a much later stage, right? Because previously I couldn't do much because I just didn't have the poly count. While working on this area, I kind of realized that it is going to be like super obvious that I'm mirroring the details. So I kind of make a note in my head to come back to this area and just overall across the mesh to fix up some stuff, or just make like these slight tweaks so that the two sides of the mesh are not the same. So then it's not going to look mirrored, well, because it's not going to be mirrored. And now we're back to the nightmarish area of these folds, but just a little bit of inflating and so on later. It's going to start looking nice. Yeah, so finally with the inflate brush across the whole thing, already it's looking a little bit nicer, but we're still going to be tweaking it later. Yeah, as previously. More polygons means I can do a bit more on each of the detail areas. So I'm going back and forth through them again, as I'm fairly okay with the face right now. There's other areas to address, and more polygons means I can do a bit more, fix a bit more, make it look nicer. So yeah, the final subdivision, I believe, what's going to become, because you see, like my mesh is still, I'm not displaying it as a smooth mesh, right? This is still faceted, but I have so many polygons that you can barely see the facets. So it means we're getting there. If I check my faces, like it's still okay. Like at the bottom right, you can see how many polygons I have on it. It could be a lot more. Like here, I'm having now a few issues of not. It's not like a clean enough fold that I'd like to have. So yeah, I got to be extra careful with higher subdivision levels. It's so easy to mess up. Like if your brush is too sensitive, or I don't know, even if you accidentally click somewhere. I see, like I'm doing like the tiniest movements, and it's all also coming back from our sculpt from the previous subdivision levels. Like all those little bumps and lumps are going to show up even more in here. So it's important to try and keep your mesh clean. You see, I'll even make my brush strength lower just so I'm affecting the mesh a lot less. Makes me be more in control at this subdivision level. I think the mesh looks so much nicer with like this detail added. Like before I had these folds, like it wasn't sort of like unified, like the whole thing, like the head was and body was sort of separate. But these, I think the connecting parts are so important, and how you approach them. Like looking at this now with like fresh eyes while recording it, I probably also add like some more details around the ear, but I am also trying to not always, but I'm trying to keep myself from over detailing stuff, keeping in mind that this is stylized. I don't like all the extra folds where folds would be, like, is not really helping me as much. I want as minimal detail as possible for this. So I'm very picky where things are. Oh, here I just messed up a little bit before because I accidentally selected another brush that I have imported and not the default one. Throughout the whole video, I'm using default brushes, nothing extra. So if you're trying these things out, you have nothing to worry about. Now here I accidentally messed up this area and I couldn't undo it, so I have to go in and fix it. I don't know how I got just distracted and did something. I think it was almost like out of my view that I clicked. A little annoying, but go and fix it. Also, I should mention that what I'm showing you throughout this whole video of like the tools that I'm using, this is like a very, very small part of what like Blender's sculpting can do. There's a lot more in there, and you can get way more complex. But I like for the most part, there's no need to overcomplicate things, and I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, and show that you can get to a fairly decent result without anything too fancy, really. Like if you're just picking up Blender like this, there's really nothing here that you couldn't pick up like straight away. So yeah, just keep in mind there's a lot more. Every brush has, like, you can see the number of brushes right on the side. There's every brush has their own options, which you can change them to have a completely different result and the way it feels. And then you have brush alphas and fall offs, and like there's a million things there that you can use in your workflow for one thing or another. But sometimes it's nice to keep things just simple and not think about that too much. As much as process oriented I am, I also think there's some beauty in the simple tools. Like, I'm not looking for a tool to do the job for me so much. I'm looking for a tool that feels good in my hands, that I can use to achieve like exactly what I'm thinking about, what I have in my head with it, without that tool getting in the way. And that's the brushes I'm using here, the tools I'm using here throughout this process. It's like I'm at no point am I fighting the tool. At no point it's doing something I don't want it to do, unless it's like my own mistake. But I know I have an expectation from what it's going to do, and it's doing exactly that. And that's all I'm asking of it. All right, so the final details to go on the face, because I'm not gonna go to a higher subdivision level anymore. I think for what I need, this is enough. I can get all the sharp edges. I can get all the folds and the curves that I need, and the pinches. So it's just about making sure things look nice at this level. So there's, again, certain few more details that I can add now with having all this extra polygons to work with. So obviously, I'm going back to the important area of the face. I'll say though, overall, if you just want to practice sculpting, just pick something out and try and sculpt it. Maybe don't do what I did here with creating like my own concepts for it, because by the time you get to sculpting, you kind of kind of, I don't know, like lose the flow, like forget that that's what your goal was. Like if your goal is so specific to get better at sculpting, just get to sculpting instead of anything else. Oh, there, the bigger looks happier now. There's some like weirdness, I think, to it because it's sort of smiling but then sleeping. I'm assuming it's fairly happy with where it's at, like a full belly sort of sleep. Like I'm not getting the same vibe that I have in the concept, but it kind of became its own thing. And when the concept is loose enough, there's room for interpretation, and there's obviously how it translates into 3D, and is the concept like, is the 2D concept good enough and precise to be turned into 3D perfectly, or things are going to change like no matter what? Some more edges to define there. I didn't like how smooth it was, so I'm adding some, just pinching up some edges in that corner, so it makes a little bit more sense with just the way the shape of the mouth is there at the corner. There's a lot of tiny little tweaks at this point, which like makes it hard to see what the overall impact of them is. But I assure you, if you compared like a before and after, it all really adds up and makes a better result. It's just, yeah, at this stage when you're nudging things here and there and kind of tightening things up, it might seem like a half an hour has passed and not much has changed because you're seeing things happen like so gradually. Now, this is one of the few occasions where I'm going back to the lower subdivision level just so I can tweak the bigger shapes, because it's easier in this level than to do it, with the very high poly model. So one that straight line going with the ear, and then there's some curvature over here that is so much easier to adjust when I'm at a lower subdivision level. Like I could have utilized this a lot more. Like I didn't feel that big of a need to do it, but it's there with the multi-res modifier for you to do. So, use it to your advantage. Overall, there's a question you also have to ask yourself if you're going to, pushing the model to like completion, to like textures and everything, is like, what do you want to what do you need from the sculpt, and how is that going to help you achieve the result? So, say if I am to texture the low poly of this mesh, is it like, do I want to add like tiny extra bumps and like cracks, or is that like not really necessary? Usually, my approach is that I'm going to keep the sculpt like this is pretty much as detailed as it gets, right? Like once I go through the whole mesh on the subdivision level, that's as detailed as it gets. I don't need a lot more in there, and any extra I'm going to do in the texturing, because I think that approach allows for a lot more freedom in changes afterwards. Because if I'm sculpting like cracks and like pieces broken off, if this is made out of clay, if there's little dents in it, like I can sculpt that, but then I can't tweak those, like they're there then. And in texturing, I could always adjust it. And if it's just part of a normal map in the end, then I really don't see why not. I don't know, maybe I enjoy texturing more than sculpting more often than not, or whatever other reason. But I think I do like the fact that it leaves that room for changes at any point. From the recordings, I can tell that this whole thing, like including the first video as well, took almost 3 hours. So I don't know. I haven't done enough of these to be able to tell, if that's like a good amount of time. But it seems pretty fun. Like in those 3 hours, I have like a low poly mesh with a nice sculpt that I can use to UV and texture, and also like probably a finished thing could be done in a full day in theory. Not usually how it works, but yeah, it's a nice little exercise that doesn't take too much time. But if you're starting out, time is not something you should ever consider. You should just focus on quality and make it the best you can. It's too easy to see a lot of those speed painting, speed sculpting videos and think that's how things should go. No, that's like all of those are for professionals to show off or to flex on their sort of skills. But that's not something I would worry about. Like I didn't really look at the time when I was making this. I was kind of enjoying it, going through the process, and that's kind of how it ended up. again, keep in mind this is just a free time project. So if you're doing something for that, like, do you want, I don't know, like, you think if you want time constraints on it so much, like, there's obviously a certain speed you would have to make things in if you were working in a studio. But for learning purposes, for studying and experimenting, like, time is usually not something I put I think about much, or I mean at all. Like, I will consider the approach and see if something can be done quicker. But in my case, it's usually like I'll try to use the shortcuts. I'll try to find different techniques. And honestly, like, I don't know, that made me like fast enough at my job as well. Like, but yeah, that's not like, my goal is not to make a cool sculpt in 45 minutes and then post it on Twitter and amaze everybody, with what I did. But it's more about just enjoying what I'm doing without a constraint like that you know for me would take away from the joy. Like, I've done like studies, like during my lunchtime, say when you have like an hour, then you put yourself a time limit. But that's, even like, in those cases, it's a bit of a different thing, because with that time limit, I'm just going to move on to another stage a bit sooner. But I don't know, my point wasn't to become like much faster by doing those. My point was to kind of just go through the process in that time and see what I get in the end, because it can be helpful, like, just to see if your approach is working. Can you save some time? Do you need to, like, spend hours like nudging at the little folds that I'm doing here, or can it just be indicated in a certain way? But in the end, again, it going to, what you're working on is going to depend on, like, what are you building it for? Like, why? What's it going to be used for? And this specifically is, well, not really used for anything. Like, I don't have any big plans. Like, maybe I'll make the rest of the assets there in the background. Maybe I won't. Like, I really don't have any plans. It's just for me to play around, to relax, get something done, learn a few new things, see what I can do with the simplest tools in Blender. And, like, that's about it. Like, I'm enjoying going through it. The end result isn't like that much important to me in this case. Like, since I worked a little bit on the tail with the mirror off, and I forgot that I had it off, so then I worked on one side without it on, and I missed, like, so I fixed one side, but I didn't fix the other because I had mirroring off. So yeah, be sure you double check if you're mirroring your strokes or not on different parts. It's just a little thing that's easy to forget, and then you're like, oops. There will be ways that you can just copy the details over, obviously, but it's nice not to make the mistakes. So now I'm still keeping the mirror off though, and I'm going to fix up, well, not fix up, just make slight adjustments to these shapes here, to the folds, so they don't look as obviously mirrored. Which is going to make it look a bit more, or a bit less like digitally made look. At this point, I more or less have it where I want it. Like, it has all the details I wanted to have. I just want to add a bit more interest. And with this madcap, I'm checking if I should like clean up a lot more in different areas if there's, random bumps and lumps. But then again, even those bumps and lumps, they might not matter all the time. Also, that's going to depend where it's seen, right? Sometimes little like shading errors, sort of, because of the mesh is okay, because with all the extra things on top, or the distance and the shader and textures, it's not going to be that visible. But now I'm changing madcaps, and I'm looking around the model, seeing if there's any areas that are in a big need of cleanup. Noticing some parts over here, so I'm going to go through. And even when this video ends, I think there's still been some areas that I wanted to fix up a bit more, make it, very precise. But that kind of depends. Kind of depends on you, really, because it might not matter in the end. And then, yeah, like for like a final bit, I wanna break the symmetry, but before I do that, I'm going to just copy the mesh, just in case I want to keep the symmetrical version. So I'm just going to duplicate it, rename it to asymmetrical, and then on this one I'm just going to mess around with the symmetry, because that's like, symmetry is just also a dead giveaway that it's made digitally, right? And it's not that I was like really going for a handmade look, but I think it creates a much more interesting like effect, or much more interesting design when it's not completely perfect. So I'll just see how much I can push things around here to make it nicer. There's probably a bit of a line between making things look asymmetrical on purpose and making things just look like too off and, like, I don't know, badly sculpted or something. So I'm a little bit careful, but I'm going to add some differences to each side. Whether it's going to matter or not in the end, I think subconsciously it is. Not that you're going to look at it and notice straight away that it's not perfectly symmetrical, because it's still going to look like pretty much symmetrical, but I hope it's going to add just a little bit of interest into the mesh. So this is like, even as a final stage, you see I'm doing like big changes across the whole mesh, like I'm moving big chunks. Like in the lower subdivision levels. And obviously, like, all the details going to be kept in there, but it's going to make the underlying shape that much more interesting. So yeah, I'm going back to even like one of the lower ones, trying to bring out more of the roundness in the main shape. It's not too late for such changes, even at this point. So I will turn everything off and look around the model to see if I notice anything that stands out, like areas that need to be smoothed out, something a little bit fixed up, some weirdnesses, which, as I've mentioned, I'm gonna leave some of them. I don't think they're going to matter too much in the end. But yeah, I don't have anything to distract me from this. So yeah, it's easier to notice such areas like I have here, where I want the fats touching, but it has, like, there was a little bit of like polys visible there. So I'm going back in with inflate, making sure it's nice on the other side as well. So it looks like they're intersecting sort of. It's the very, very final stuff. Or even after this point, it could be like sculpted on top of to make it look more stylized. Like these, I find these shapes are playful, round, and fun. But maybe you wanted to like cut away at some of the edges, add some, like, go over with a scrape brush or something similar to add like even more stylization. That's up to you. That's depends on what you want it to look like. In my case, uh, I doubt I'm gonna be touching it. I'm kind of keen on trying to see what I can do with sculpting this. Maybe I can turn it instead into some garden ornament. Make it out of stone, have a lot of moss on it. Maybe that could be fun. Or maybe just make a few versions and see how same mesh can be, can in like two different complete situations. Anyway, there's options. There's always options. It's kind of what I feel about what I feel like when it comes to personal work. So we're really nearing the end now here. I hope this process showed you that, you can get to a nice stage with the simplest tools without too much knowledge in how Blender deals with stuff. I hope it was a good primer to getting into sculpting in Blender without overthinking too much, not getting confused by all the limitless amounts of things that Blender has to offer. Hope you enjoyed it. If you've managed to sit through any of this and it was useful. So maybe see you next time. Maybe not. I don't have many plans of what comes next, if anything comes next. This was just fun to do in this case. So I'll call the sculpt done. Let the video, like the last few minutes, run out. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.